Hello, I welcome students back for the second lecture. In the first lecture, we discussed what we mean by floriculture, what are the methods and the parameters involved in establishment of a floricultural garden. Today, we will discuss how one can prepare a garden for floricultural purposes. Now, essentially, once a garden has been created on the basis of different requirements, that means structural pattern, wherein different segments have been identified, that is the lawn, flower beds, rosaries and so on, one has to start the preparation by a step wherein we refer to as digging. Now, question is, when we start digging, what are the fundamental requirements for that? In this case, one must first of all try to see what type of soil and what type of habitat he is trying to establish a garden is. And on the basis of that soil as well as on the basis of that particular habitat, he will require different equipment for this digging purpose. And for starting the digging, one must first of all try to identify what are the fundamental factors which he wants to either facilitate or add or sometimes even remove from the soil which he is trying to dig. And in this case, the first and foremost requirement is the removal of weeds. Now here, weeds are those plants which actually grow almost anywhere and everywhere, and their growth, their survival pattern sometimes proves drastically negative to any cultivated plants. And ordinarily in any area, that means in a garden or a vegetative garden or sometimes even a fruit orchard, we find that the weeds actually have a drastic effect on the productive potential of all the fruits as well as other plants in that area. It is essentially important to remove and dig out all those weeds which are trying or which are surviving in those areas in which we try to transplant ornamental plants. Sometimes we can either manually remove them, that is by digging them out with the help of an hand. Sometimes we have to dig the soil so that their roots can be brought out and these weeds in turn can be thrown away from the garden. Now here you will find that there are certain weeds wherein even if a portion of a root or a rhizomatous part remains embedded in the soil, after we transplant flowering plants, we will find that immediately the weeds also show sprouting. That means the essential requirement is to almost remove any part of the weed. Maybe it is the root, maybe it is the rhizome, maybe it is foliage, sometimes even fruits or seeds which have dropped into the soil, they need to be removed. And it has been seen that in this removal, soil gets actually facilitated by two different factors also. One, sometimes the soil gets totally blocked for aeration because of the non-digging. Therefore, in such cases, it is important that along with the removal of the weeds, we try to facilitate the aeration of the soil. It has been seen that this aeration of the soil actually facilitates the absorptive potential of each and every plant that has been transplanted into these beds. Then once we dig these, the question arises, how deep should we dig the soil? Ordinarily, we have seen that if we manually dig it, we can dig it up to a maximum depth of 1 feet. It has been seen that such digging practice is useful commercially, but it can sustain a productive plant ordinarily for a period of 2 to 3 years only. However, if we want to commercially use a bed for productive purposes, in that case, it has been seen that at an interval of 3 to a maximum of 5 years, one has to dig a soil up to a depth ranging from 3 to 5 feet. Now here, one must explain the reasons for this. It has been seen that if soil is dug up ordinarily only up to 1 feet deep, it is seen that the lower portion of the soil get totally blocked, which actually incompete the aeration, absorptive potential as well as the nutrient availability to the plant that is grown. However, if we dig it up to a depth of 3 to 5 feet, it has been seen that those portions of the soil which have literally solidified can become loosened up and facilitate absorption of not only nutrients, moisture as well as facilitate the aeration of the root portion of the plants. And it also has been seen that this in turn improves the productive potential of the soil in terms of any type of the plant that is cultivated there. It has been seen that once the soil has been dug up, it needs addition of specific fertilizers. Ordinarily, the normal practice is that as soon as the soil is to be dug out, a thin layer of organic manure, as you can see, is spread thinly over these beds. And then this organic manure during digging is mixed up with the soil. Then the soil is allowed to remain as such roughly for a period of 7 to 10 days, so that this organic manure gets decomposed and mixed with the soil as such. And once the organic manure has decomposed, we try to level the ground so that during that leveling, whatever major blocks of this organic manure are left, they get continuously mixed up with the soil. And then once the digging has been carried out, question here is it ready for transplantation of the plants at that stage, or one has to monitor the change in the soil features for some durations. It has been seen that for bulbous ornamentals, that is for dahlias, for cannas, for tulips, for irises, etc., ordinarily immediately after digging, they can be as such sown into the areas. However, if we want to sow the seeds for grazing or raising of seedlings, in that case, one has to wait till the texture of the soil becomes absolutely soft. As you can see, a gardener testing the texture of the soil prior to plantation of the seeds. Once this has been seen or observed that the soil has become smooth, they try to separate seeds into different groups. Here, grouping of the seeds is based on the characters of the seed morphology. There are some seeds which are absolutely small in size. There are some seeds which are absolutely large in size, as you can see. It has been seen that if a smaller seed is sown much deeper into the soil, its productive potential gets hampered because it does not have a potential to compete with the depth of the soil in which it has been embedded. On the other hand, if a larger and a harder seed is sown on the surface, it also shows negative results. This is because of the fact that harder seeds need to be deposited much deeper in the soil so that it absorbs larger quantities of moisture as well as nutrients, which facilitates its easy and proper germination. It has been seen that once the seeds have been categorized into these groups, that is softer and smaller seeds, harder and bigger seeds, their sowing also is dependent on the habitat in which they normally grow. If a seed prefers slightly warmer conditions for its germination, ordinarily it has been seen that it is not to be grown in the open air nurseries. In such cases, it has been seen that a polyhouse or a greenhouse can facilitate as well as maintain their developmental pattern. On the other hand, if these seeds are sown in the open air conditions or in the open nurseries, it has been seen their growth pattern, developmental pattern as well as survival pattern is almost negligible as compared to those grown under inner conditions. Therefore, whosoever is trying to cultivate ornamentals on commercial basis, he has to see that he has nurseries on the outdoor conditions and nurseries on the indoor conditions, which can be maintained either in a polyhouse or sometimes even in a greenhouse, wherein on trays one can sow seeds and maintain them as long as the seedlings become transferable. Then Once this also has been finalized, one has to see as to how much quantity of a seed can be sown in specific areas. Ordinarily, one has to have a knowledge as to the potential of a seed in terms of its growth as well as in terms of the size of the seedling that it produces. If size of the seedling is large in terms of its density as well as in terms of its height, in that case the number of seeds, that means the quantity of the seeds per area, is much less than in those cases where the seed has a much smaller and much weaker seedlings produced. That automatically means there we have to sow the seedlings or seeds in a denser pattern as compared to those where their potential is much higher. Then once the seeds have been sown, there is one fundamental requirement irrespective of the seed size, and that is that each seed is to be actually embedded into the soil in which it is sown. Sometimes it can be covered with a thin layer of soil, sometimes with a thin layer of ash, and sometimes if the habitat is slightly cooler, it is covered with dried foliage or dried grasses, as you can see. This means that each seed has a requirement in terms of its germinable potential. And then once this has also been achieved, it needs irrigation. Now here, irrigation is to be regularly monitored. That means some seeds need irrigation almost at intervals of 1 or 2 days, while as some seeds need irrigation at intervals of weeks, some fortnights, some even need no irrigation at all during their germination period. That means if we provide an undesired irrigation or less irrigation to the seeds that have been sown, that will result in negative viability as well as productivity of these seeds into seedlings. That is why in a nursery one has to regularly monitor as to the requirements of the seeds sown as well as to the irrigation that they require. And once the seeds start sprouting, one has to regularly monitor them for two fundamental factors. One, whether they have tremendous viability and vigor. Viability means that whatever number of seeds we have sown, have all those given rise to seedlings, that means 100% viability. If the viability is lesser, that means out of 100 seeds, only 50 have germinated, that indicates that we may have to resow some more viable seeds. Second important aspect is to check what is referred to as seed vigor. Vigor means a potential of a seed to give rise to an important and growable seedling. It can ordinarily be seen by monitoring the developmental pattern of a seedling. If it grows normally, it produces normal branches, foliage and other required parts, it means that it has with viability vigor also. But if it produces a seedling but the seedling is not able to grow, that means it does not have vigor in it. In that case also, sometimes the gardeners or the producers may have to resow slightly viable as well as more vigorous seeds. Once this has also been achieved, one has to monitor these seedlings to a level wherein they reach what is referred to as the transplanting stage. Now, transplanting here means removing these seedlings from a nursery and planting them into the desired beds. Now, here question is, when we talk of transplantation, in that case, how can we remove the seedlings from that seed bed or from a seedling bed? Then once we have removed them, which specific duration of time is suitable for that removal as well as transplantation? Ordinarily, it has been seen that each of these seedlings should not be manually or removed with the help of the hand. One should try to use a digging instrument, normally referred to as a chisel, which should actually loosen up the soil around the root portion of the seedling and then tried to remove it from the bed into a container. You can see how the seedlings are removed and then kept into a container. And then after a desired number of seedlings have been removed, the bed from which these have been removed should be reblocked or covered by the soil so that the remaining seedlings do not get destroyed there. Then the seedlings in turn should be transplanted to the bed in which we want them to produce flowers. Now, ordinarily here, two important factors are essential. One is the time of transplantation. Second, what should be done after transplantation. Fundamental feature is that transplantation should be carried out in the morning hours. Reason for that is, it is said that in the morning any and every plant is viable as well as vigorous, and as soon as we transfer it to a new habitat, it is seen that it immediately gets adapted to that condition. That means once seedling is removed in the morning, it should be transplanted immediately in that period. Second important feature is that as soon as it is transplanted, it needs irrigation. That is, water should be supplied around each seedling so that it actually is able to get adjusted in its new habitat. Now, ordinarily we try to use either a container or a mechanized means of irrigation, that is by using generators and pipe. However, it has been seen that the water should not directly come in contact with the seedlings, because ordinarily it has been seen to damage the structural pattern of the plant. Therefore, it is advisable as soon as the plants are transplanted into main beds, the irrigation should be carried out systematically so that each bed actually is able to maintain and sustain the seedlings there. Then it has been seen that this transplantation ordinarily is suitable to be completed by around 12 noon, because after that the adaptability pattern not only of the plant but also the receptivity of the bed has become negated because of the higher temperatures. The soil of the bed into which it is to, if the plant is to be transplanted, becomes hotter, and it has been seen that in that case the roots ordinarily do not get adjusted, and therefore after 12 noon it is normally advised that there should be no transplantation of any seedling irrespective of its type. And once the seedling has been irrigated, it should be monitored for next few days regularly whether its survival potential and adaptability is suitable or not. As you can see, sometimes after 2 or 3 days, certain seedlings tend to show slight senescence. That means they try to lose up their basic structural pattern. In that case, they show that they have not got adapted to the habitat in which they have been transplanted. Therefore, it is advisable that if any seedling is found to show non-adaptability pattern, it should be immediately replaced so that whatever is transplanted there is able to compete with the adjacent seedlings. And then once all the seedlings have established, it is important that one should monitor them in terms of nutrient requirement as well as in terms of whatever weeds have developed in the vicinity. Normally, the weeds tend to develop immediately after the flower bearing plants have been transplanted. This is essentially due to the fact that once we irrigate a seedling, that irrigation also facilitates the developmental pattern of a weed. So, it has been advised that as soon as the transplanted plants adapt, we should try to carry out de-weeding, which is normally referred to as digging of a flower bed. You can see how de-weeding is carried out by digging whatever seedlings have developed in this bed. Now, once this has been established, it is shown or it is revealed that the seedlings have established fully in these beds, and they will simultaneously reach a stage wherein they will produce flowers, and that flower production will continue as long as the flowering cycle of the plant will continue. This was about those plants in which we use seeds as well as seedling for transplantation. Now, question arises, what can we do about bulbous plants or rhizomatous plants or tuberous plants? For example, tulips, dahlias, cannas. In this case, it has been seen that ordinarily the spring season is the normal season for their transplantation, and one should usually divide them in the simple segments or parts, wherein each segment is able to sustain one particular type of the ornamental rhizomatous plant. That means we can cultivate tulips on one type of soil or one type of bed, we can cultivate cannas on another type, dahlias on another type, gladiols on another type, so that their survival pattern in each of these habitats is able to sustain their productive potential. Then once this has been categorized, it is usually advisable to plant these manually. That means one can take the bulb, the rhizome or the tuber of a plant in his hand and try to plant it in a bed at a systematic time and at a systematic intervals, so that this plantation does not in any way either hamper its own development or negate the development of the plants that have been grown in the vicinity of this. As you can see, they are normally grown at the back row of each of these beds, and once planted they have simply to be provided irrigation at the time of sowing, so that their soil in which they have been deposited gets adhered to them, and subsequently they do not need irrigation till they show sprouting. Now, it has been seen that once these bulbous plants are actually reaching a vegetative phase, that is, once they start showing the development of the main plant, their pattern as well as their development does not in any way hamper or deplete the pattern of development of the other plants within the same bed. And it has been seen that these plants in relation to the normal flowering plants have much better adaptability pattern as well as much higher productive potential because of their greater absorptive portion, that is the rhizome or the bulb or the underground portions. So, it means that if in a bed we try to cultivate both herbals as well as the rhizomatous portions together, even if the herbals mature and reach a stage of senescence, we will still have at the back of that bed the rhizomatous portions, bulbous portions still surviving for almost whole season. Then after this has been maintained, that means we have planted herbal seedlings as well as bulbous plants, what do they require throughout the growing season? Now, here again two important aspects have been worked out on the basis of the requirements. These are the pattern of irrigation as well as the availability or the application of the nutrients. Now, when we talk of irrigation, it has been seen that ordinarily one should provide irrigation to these plants as is desired by the plant itself, not as is actually thought by the cultivator. Second is, the nutrients should be provided in the form of either organic manures or inorganic manures, which are ordinarily referred to as urea or NPK. They should not be provided to these plants unless and until one has a knowledge as to how much of a quantity one should provide to a specific number of plants. It has been seen that if higher doses of nutrients are provided, that means if we add to a specific area a much higher dose of a nutrient, either a organic nutrient or an inorganic nutrient or a fertilizer, it has been seen that that sometimes proves drastically negative to the production survival. One can see that if he adds a fertilizer to the soil and then monitors them, if the fertilizer quantity is higher, some of the seedlings next morning or immediately after addition of these fertilizers tends to collapse because of the blockade of its conducting strand. That means this excessive nutrients actually facilitates the blockade of the absorption duct of the plant as such. Therefore, whenever nutrient is applied, the quantity should be specific, and that quantity also needs specific quantity of the moisture, that is water, provided to it. And then once we provide these two, how long should we actually maintain that particular quantity as well as concentration. Ordinarily, it has been seen that the plants, whether they are ornamental or commercially useful other products, they need fertilizers at 3 distinct stages of life. One, prior to the transplantation of the plant, that means a flower bed prior to its preparation should be added with certain fertilizers. Second is, as soon as the transplanted seedlings actually start showing proper adaptability, that means they develop properly in the transplant conditions at that stage. And third is a stage when the flowering portions, that is the flowers of a plant, start developing. It has been seen that as soon as flowers developing, if fertilizers are properly added in proper dosage along with proper irrigation, the survival pattern as well as the quantity of the flower remains consistently superior throughout that period. This concept has actually improved the survival potential of the flowers also. It has been seen that in some cases, a plant which is ordinarily classified as a plant of short duration can sometimes survive for almost whole year. One can quote an example. Sometimes the pansy plants, when it is sown in the month of September, if provided proper nutrients, proper irrigation, proper survival pattern, can sustain its flower production for almost up to the next September also. That means its survival pattern has been improved from a short duration of 4 to 5 months to a long duration of 9 to 11 months. This is because of the addition of proper irrigation as well as proper material to these. This means that once the garden has been prepared and all the flowers has been transplanted, it can be sustained as per the desired requirements, and that requirement in turn can facilitate the maintenance as well as productive potential of the garden which has been created. It has been seen that for domestic as well as for commercial purposes, such practices have been constantly followed and much better results have constantly been obtained in the floriculture part. With this, we conclude the second part of the lecture, that is how to prepare a garden and how to start transplantation and maintenance of these ornamentals. Thank you.